we've said all on air we're going to get 50-50, and we've also said we're going to get rid of the gender pay gap. So that's the gap between all men and women employed at the BBC, which is currently 10%.
So that means that off-air, whether it is people in graphics, whether it's people in editing, whether it's people in planning, will all have pay parity by 2020, all of them?
On average. So when you compare what women earn compared to what men earn, you will get rid of the gap which exists at the moment, which is about 10%. This is something that all organisations who employ more than 250 people are going to have to face up to. We're all going to have our gender pay gap disclosed this time next year. And we've said something which I don't think anyone else has said, which is we want to get rid of the gender pay gap. We're already a bit better than the national average, but we want to go further. Well,
let's now look then at on-air. So you're going to get rid of the pay gap, and you're going to get rid of the gender imbalance in terms of on-air talent. Yep. How are you going to do that?
So we've already done
3 years.
Yeah, so we need to change the mix of people. So that's about when people retire or leave to go somewhere else, you need to bring on a more diverse mix. So we've been doing that. So 60% of the kind of new entrants onto this list are women, 20% are from ethnic minority backgrounds. So that has improved this list. We'll do more of that. And then obviously we need to look at pay as well. So, quite a lot of men have been taking pay cuts already. John Humphreys said that today.
Yeah. And will you be expecting more male on-air talent to take a pay cut?
I'm not going to start negotiating live on air, but
well, something's going to give.
That's clearly one of the levers that we can pull. Yes, absolutely, and we have been doing that. So, but it's not a cookie cutter approach. With every single one of these contracts, we go through and look at their market value.
But hang on, how are you going to actually do that? I mean, how are you going to say? Well, you can say to Gary Lineker, you're earning whatever you're earning, 2.6 million. Can you just give 600,000 up because we want to bring on new female talent in sport? How will that go down?
Well, we've been doing that already.
So you might do it to Gary Lineker, for example?
Look, I'm not going to start going into individual contracts.
Okay.
I hope you understand.
But what actually is parity in terms of on-air pay? Is it same hours, same job?
That's a very good question. I think if someone's got exactly the same job, the same experience, the same history, the same audience value, of course they're paid the same amount. With top talent, that's very rarely the case. It's very hard to compare people on this list. So what we do to get the right talent is we have an individual negotiation with them. It's a rigorous process. We do research. We look at what the audience wants, what they bring to their BBC, the commercial value, and we negotiate something based on that.
Right. So let's just look at an example then. You've got, for example, you have, say, 3 male presenters and 3 female presenters on the Today programme. They're broadcasting for the same amount of time. A lot of them have got extremely good experience. Would you expect them to get the same money?
I wouldn't actually, because John Humphreys obviously brings something pretty unique. He's the outstanding interviewer of his generation. He's got a unique value to the BBC, and that is something that we recognise. Like all,
But you recognise it when he doesn't even need it recognised. It's extraordinary because he said there that actually he didn't look for pay rises, but he kept getting them. And he's also said that he won't go anywhere else. So actually, that's not about the market. You just want to give John Humphreys lots of money.
I've never said it's just about the market. The market is one factor. It's also the audience value, the value to the BBC. Actually, on the Today programme, the lowest paid person is a man.
Well, actually, that's not. We can go into the detail of that, but that's not actually quite right because there's a different equation that operates in the Today programme. But seeing you mention the Today programme in that way, Sarah Montague is a senior presenter on that programme. She's not been there as long as John Humphreys. She's a senior presenter on that programme. She does over 100 programmes a year. She's not even on the list. How on earth did that happen?
She's a brilliant broadcaster, and the reason I can't go into individual details, but the lowest paid person out of those presenters... But
that's not what I'm asking. That is absolutely not what I'm asking. She has been in that programme for more than 12 years, and somehow she's not on the list. Isn't that a mistake?
That is one of the things that we'll continue to look at as we do people's contracts.
Now, what happens when one of the Today presenters, I'm sticking with Today because it's just a kind of obvious example, gets a very, very lucrative offer from, say, LBC, and they come to you and they say, we have a very lucrative offer from LBC. Do you say, as John Whittingdale would suggest, you might say, that's fantastic, go? Or do you give them more money, in which case suddenly the pay parity in the Today programme goes completely out the window?
It depends. We sometimes let people go. We sometimes walk away from negotiations. That's happened recently at the BBC in terms of news presenters. Normally what we'd go and do and say, OK, well, there's a market value here. Does that change the package we should offer people? And we try and make an offer which is competitive, but normally less than the market.
But if that then puts the parity on the Today programme presenters completely out the window and is a terrible imbalance, would you just give them more money as well?
we would do it basically, the key criterion is a value to the audience. That's what we'd start with, and sometimes that does mean you get, that's why these comparisons are hard to make.
But it's interesting because what's going to happen here? Because the BBC, we're constantly being told is there's no money sloshing around the BBC. Yeah. By and large, especially in the older categories, men get paid a lot more than women. So are you going to take money from men and give it to women?
We're actually making lots of savings to fund this. So we have been reducing talent costs, but we've made lots of other savings, like £75 million on the IT programme. So there are other ways of funding inflation if that's what happens. We're clearly going to try and stop wage inflation as well. So as I said, we can change the mix, we can bring on a more diverse group of people, and we can also look at the relativities of pay.
Thanks very much for the moment, James Purnell. Liz Forgan, you were here 20 years ago. Should you have done more 20 years ago? Because, you know, as Chris Cook said, it gets more difficult the older the presenters are.
Probably yes. And I think about myself. It never occurred to me to ask what the pay range was of the job I was going to the BBC to get. Now, if I had been a man, I probably would have done. So I think women have some responsibility also in this history that we are less assertive, have been in the past anyway, less assertive than men. Don't look at me like that. That's not an excuse.
How would that go down is what I want to say.
That is not an excuse, that is not a justification. It may be partly a historical explanation. But of course, it's an indefensible state of affairs and it's got to be remedied immediately.
But you were very critical of the notion that the BBC had to disclose. But actually, if this is the big bang, and as a result of that disclosure, as James Purnell says, we're going to have pay parity, gender parity, on-screen and off-screen in 3 years' time, that's better, isn't it?
I think that would be a brilliant outcome of this day, which in other respects I find quite sad. I mean, I think there is an overwhelming argument for the BBC to disclose more information than it has done, but there is absolutely no need to have individual salaries in order to tell you what's going on with the BBC. It could have published data split by number of people in pay categories, split by gender, split by race, split by anything you like, would have told us what was going on with BBC pay. Individual salaries is another matter.
If you think, as James Purnell seems to think, that part of this can be solved by taking money away from the men and giving it to women, is that a very good plan? Because it looks like we're doing charity for the women.
I think that's not the basis for a policy. I mean, as James says, the BBC is a big place. There's money here and money there. And if that is really a priority for the BBC, which it clearly now has to be, then there are ways of addressing this issue without taking money away from men directly. I think that would be a very crude way of going about your
But if you look at the inevitability that there will be kinks and different problems around the bend, I mean, what Tony Hall committed the BBC to today, given that we are halfway through 2017, is to have this fixed, essentially in 2.5 years' time.
Well, I would be amazed if he manages it, frankly. I'm sure he means to, but, you know, as James started to illustrate, this is very complicated stuff. There is never just one reason why somebody's paid what they're paid. There's all kinds of ingredients into deciding what anybody's worth. And this one is now going to trump everything else.
But do you think it's possible to do it without pushing up costs, really?
Well, it will have to.
Just turning to you on that, how is that possible, James Purnell, that you're going to be able to do this without adding to costs? Well, for the licence payers watching this tonight as well.
No, I think that's a very good point, and that's why we fought against this disclosure, because we thought it would create an inflationary pressure. I mean, to give you an example, two examples maybe, we've done it with breakfast shows on local radio. Used to be 14% women, it's now 50-50. We did that in 2 years, I think. Similarly, with our pay for the whole of our staff, you know, we've constantly had disproportionate increases for the lowest paid. Again, that will help with this target. So it's a matter of putting all the levers that we can. Our pay gap is 10%, so, you know, I think we are hopeful that we can...
But 10% is still a lot to do it for 2.5 years without actually saying to some of the well-paid men in the BBC, you look at that huge difference in the top 10 of those 100. Massive difference proportionately what men get to women. Are you going to actually make the men take a pay cut?
We're going to look at individual negotiations. I'm not going to get into that.
No, but I'm talking about. I'm not asking for individual negotiation. I'm actually asking you across the board. Are you going to ask men to take pay cuts?
We have been doing that, and people on this list have been. They're disproportionately men, so men have been taking pay cuts. John Humphrey spoke about that today.
But
we're not going to do it in a sort of box-ticky way. It is
No.
going to be based on getting the right talent. And if we were starting from today, as if we hadn't discovered anything, yes, it would be very hard to get there. Actually, we've been working on this for 3 years now. 60% of the people coming onto this list are women. We can build on that, and we're aiming to get to equality by 2020, and probably the only organisation I know that's doing that.
Thank you both very much indeed.